it's Lee from colouringqueen.net, and today I thought I would finish up my coloured picture for my Asia in August colour along. And I know I may be a bit late uploading this, it may be September the 1st. So I'm colouring this with Muji pencils, and I already did some of it on another video, and hopefully I'll finish it up today for this one. And I thought I would tell you a different type of story today, a crime-based one. And my apologies if I've done quite a lot of this picture off camera. I'm working with 2 sprained wrists at the moment, and it is actually a lot harder to work with than I originally thought. But anyway, so today I thought we would do a crime-based story. And I've called it Coffee, Crime and Colouring, but I drank the coffee. So it's just crime and coffee. Crime and colouring today. So it's a heartbreaking story, but it doesn't involve any graphic descriptions or violence, but it does involve death. So if this is not your cup of tea or coffee, make sure you skip this video and go to one of my colour and stories or colour and chats or somewhere else if it's not for you. So it's going to be a sanitised story anyway, to keep it sort of clean for YouTube, and I'll be missing out a few details and rumours and other things that couldn't be verified by multiple sources or are a bit too graphic for today's chat. So the crime takes place in Rockhampton in Queensland, Australia, and it's known as the beef capital of Australia and for being really hot. So buckle up and let's dive in. So when Jennifer Ryan dropped her 14-year-old daughter Natasha at Rockhampton North High School on 31st of August 1998, Natasha leant over and gave her mum a kiss on the cheek and said, "I love you." Jennifer would have no idea that her whole world and her family's world was about to be turned upside down. Natasha, like many teens, had been going through some issues of her own. She was upset that her parents had divorced. She had the usual teenage angst, problems at school. It all seemed too much. And like many teenage girls, Natasha and her mother clashed during these years, and she was rebelling against her mother's rules, school, life in general. You know how it is. Her father Robert had remarried, and he was living in Bundaberg, a few hours away from Natasha, with his second wife Debbie. And on this day, when Jenny dropped Natasha at school, she didn't come home, and her mother sat and waited and worried, as mothers do. Where was she? Had she run away again? She had a history of it. She'd done it before, sometimes hours, sometimes a day, and a month before she'd actually run away but been found 2 days later at her boyfriend's place. Her boyfriend was Scott Black, and he was 22 and she was 14, and her parents didn't approve of the relationship due to the age difference, and no doubt that caused more fights. Scott had previously denied to police that Natasha was there the last time she'd run away, but when they found her there, he was charged with willful obstruction. After that, when Natasha came home, everything seemed to go a bit smoother. She seemed to be getting along with the family and making more of an effort. But here it was, a month later, and Natasha was missing again. The obvious conclusion was once again she'd run away to her boyfriend's house. Police were sent to Scott's home, and frighteningly, he said that he did not know where Natasha was. His home was searched and she was not there. If she wasn't with Scott, where on earth could she have gone? She was reported missing the next day to police, and it didn't seem that Natasha had planned to run away, as her clothes were still in the wardrobe at home, and she only seemed to have taken the items that she'd taken to school that day and no money. Plus, things had been better at home. Police were told by school staff that Natasha was a troubled student who had sought help previously from child mental health services and been prescribed medications. Unfortunately, when you have a history of running away, the police tend not to take the cases seriously and jump into action, particularly as there'd been a reported sighting of Natasha 2 days after she'd gone missing. She was seen playing video games at a cinema complex before leaving with a man in a car voluntarily. And so it took about a month for the police to issue a public appeal, notifying the public that Natasha was missing and asking her to get in contact, even if it was through a third party, to let them know that she was okay. Because they had reason to believe that she was okay because she'd been seen getting into that car. Her parents by now were seriously concerned and worried, and they couldn't help feeling that this time it was different. She'd never run away from home for that long, and she would have contacted them. Despite the divorce, the parents loved their children and they wanted the best for them. Months later, her mother said, "I don't believe Natasha would have let me go through all the pain if she was out there." Police and emergency services searched for her, but she wasn't found. And so the police had no choice but to start an investigation and looking around at the people that knew her best. And they looked, first of all, at the last person to see her, and that person was Natasha's best friend, Mayo Takatawa, who was only 15 at the time. Mayo had moved with his family from New Zealand to start a better life in Australia. And he didn't want to leave his home in New Zealand. He was an excellent student and had been written up in the papers for all of his achievements. It's hard moving to another country and making friends. But then he met Natasha and they were drawn to each other, and it made the move to a different country easier having a friend. Mayo told Now to Love magazine in an interview that he was broken when Natasha went missing, saying, "I cried every single night because I believed Natasha was dead." 2 years after Natasha disappeared, when Mayo was just 16, he would be taken from his English class by the police for questioning. And he recalled that his teacher was crying, the school counsellor came running in, telling the cops that they couldn't do this. And of course, the news spread through the community, and even though he was not charged, his life changed. And he recalls that he couldn't face walking down the street, and he didn't go to school for months because people were looking at him and thinking that he'd murdered his best friend. Eventually it was too much for the family and they moved out of the area. And Mayo has had a very challenging life. I will leave a link below to that Now to Love magazine article where he was interviewed. He has a really sad life, and I hope his life has turned around. Around this time, police were well aware that there were a number of disappearances of women in the Rockhampton area, and they started to suspect that there was a serial killer operating in the area. The last female to go missing was Kyra Steinhardt, and this was 8 months after Natasha had not come home from school. Kyra was only 9. This time there had been someone who witnessed an incident that was able to provide information to the police that ultimately led them to their suspect and to Kyra's remains. The suspect's name was Leonard Fraser, a career criminal that had done time for horrendous crimes and a suspected serial killer. A prison psychiatrist had previously declared him to be an untreatable psychopath. You can Google him if you fancy, but you may wish that you hadn't. He was charged and convicted of Kyra's death on 7th of September 2000. And there was more to Kyra's passing than that, but I think we will just leave it at that. And he received a life sentence, meaning a minimum term of 30 years, that is. A search of his home at the time unveiled his selection of trophies. He liked to collect ponytails of hair, and many of these ponytails belong to women that have never been accounted for. Prisoners that commit crimes against children, particularly the type of crime that Kyra endured, are never popular in the general inmate population of prisons. In Australia, they're known as rock spiders, and they're often targeted for violence. Like most, Leonard Fraser could dish it out, but he couldn't take it. So he wanted a deal to get out of the general population. Police believe that he might have killed others, including 3 women that had disappeared in the area and Natasha Ryan. But at the time, they couldn't tie him to anything concrete. They had no evidence. Then they got a break. Leonard had been quite chatty with a fellow inmate, Alan Quinn, and over a series of conversations, he bragged to Alan about the victims that were out there, what he had done, and where he had buried them. And Alan, seeing a chance for better conditions, decided to pass on this information to the police, who were happy to cooperate, and they set up a informant-based situation. So after Alan already had that knowledge, Leonard and Alan talked more, and ultimately Leonard confessed to him that he had also killed Natasha Ryan. He told Alan that he met Natasha at the cinema in Rockhampton, and he offered her a ride to Yeppoon and detailed what he'd done and where he'd buried her very specifically. And if that wasn't enough, he also drew some maps. The information seemed pretty credible. The information was also given to a police detective during a 2001 investigation by Task Force Alex into the disappearance of the 4 Rockhampton women. During their relationship, Quinn had actually convinced Fraser to show police where he dumped the victims' bodies, but he wanted a deal. If he confessed to the 4 murders, including Natasha Ryan, he wanted to be moved to the John Oxley Memorial Hospital rather than prison, where he was likely to be beaten. He was already in jail for the minimum of 30 years, and his confession and details of where the remains were would ensure the families could lay their loved ones to rest. No one likes to do a deal with the devil, but sometimes it's the only way to give families closure, and prosecutors and police often have to decide what's more important, is to find these victims or to get more time in jail for somebody. The victims he confessed to killing were Beverly Lego, Sylvia Benedetti, Julie Turner and Natasha Ryan, all of which had gone missing in the Rockhampton area during 1998 and 1999. He was charged with their murders 2 years after Natasha had disappeared, and then the search began in earnest for the bodies of the 4 women. Even though there were maps that were provided by Leonard Fraser, they still needed more than 100 state emergency service volunteers and extensive areas of bushland to be burned in order to recover these remains. And of course, he had confessed to killing Natasha, so the police were tasked with letting her parents know that a confessed serial killer had claimed responsibility for the death of their daughter. I cannot imagine the trauma this family went through, imagining what their daughter had gone through and wondering if they would ever be able to find her remains to give her a final resting place. With the knowledge that their daughter was no longer alive in 2001, on what would have been Natasha's 17th birthday, 70 of Natasha's loved ones gathered for a memorial service. Balloons were released, memories were shared, people chatted about the girl that gave up Christmas one year to do charity work, and a video of Natasha as bridesmaid at her father's wedding to Debbie was played. And people mourned the girl who would never be able to do all the things that teenagers do. Graduate from high school, date, share in family events, marriages, funerals, parties, celebrations. Events that would also be missing the one person that couldn't be replaced. So the map that Leonard Fraser drew and all the details he gave of Natasha's burial site didn't recover any finds and no evidence. There was nothing there. But the other maps he provided led to the search and recovery of remains of the 3 other victims. Fraser told an inmate he was getting really frustrated because police couldn't find the remains of Natasha using his maps, and eventually he said he didn't kill Natasha and that she was actually alive and well and living in Rockhampton. By this stage, Leonard Fraser was no longer cooperating with police. In April 2003, the trial of Leonard Fraser began, where he pled not guilty even though he had confessed to the murders of 4 women, which included Natasha Ryan. On the 10th of April 2003, 9 days or so into the trial, Natasha's father, Robert, who was in court, hoping to see justice done, no doubt. Before Robert could even take his seat, a police investigator took him aside and walked him outside. He said to him, "We've found a woman that we believe is Natasha, but we want you to speak to her and see if you can confirm it." I can't imagine the shock that Robert felt and how difficult it must have been to process this information. He was at Natasha's murder trial, and now the police are telling him that there is a woman claiming to be his daughter. The phone was given to Robert and the female spoke to him, but he couldn't tell after nearly 5 years if it was his daughter or not on the other line. So he decided to test the caller by asking her something that only she would know. The pet name, he called her. The female voice said, "I love you very much, Daddy, and it's Grasshopper." And Robert, of course, was overwhelmed and nearly collapsed. An officer then called her mother, Jenny, and she couldn't take in what he was saying and assumed at first they'd found her daughter's body, not her daughter alive. The prosecutor, Paul Rutledge, then had the task of informing the court, for the only time in Queensland history, that a unique event had occurred. I'm pleased to inform the court that Leonard John Fraser is not guilty of the murder of Natasha Ann Ryan. Natasha Ryan is alive. The court was stunned and the media went crazy. This was unheard of. He also advised that the prosecution would still be pursuing the charges related to the other 3 victims. Justice Ambrose adjourned court until Monday so the defence could decide if a mistrial should occur, because remember, this man has been charged for a murder when there was, in fact, no murder victim. So the trial of Leonard Fraser continued, and it was amended to the 3 victims, with neither prosecution or the defence requesting a mistrial as they were entitled to do. But where had Natasha been? When Natasha was dropped off at school that day, she attended a few classes, but then had some words with a teacher and left. She took herself off to the cinema and called Scott to get her, and she was upset, possibly depressed, and had threatened to harm herself. So he took her home to Yeppoon, and when the police arrived to question him, he lied to them about her whereabouts, just like he'd done previously. And when they searched his property, Natasha was in hiding. Maybe in the roof cavity, or maybe the search wasn't that thorough. I'd love to know. Days turned into weeks, turned into months and years, and the couple ended up creating an odd and bizarre isolated little home for themselves. Terrified of being recognised and getting her and Scott in trouble, the two lived life with the curtains drawn, the TV volume down, and Natasha never leaving the home in daylight. In fact, over the years that they lived in this world, she only left at night on a few occasions, hidden in the back of her boyfriend's ute, and then only to go somewhere secluded like the beach. Her life would be spent working out in the home gym for an hour or so, teaching herself to sew, to make clothes, repurposing old towels for feminine products, as well as cleaning their home. Lots of cleaning. Her clothes were never hung out on the washing line to alert anyone that a female was living there. And she sewed her own clothes because Scott, a single man, couldn't risk purchasing girls' clothing. Scott's neighbours, family and colleagues thought he was a single man living alone with few friends and no girlfriend. Some of the neighbours felt sorry for the young guy who never seemed to have a social life and kept his house in darkness. Scott would leave for work from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. in his job as a milkman, but would return home for lunch. Natasha would then have his company. All the time. Only him. Instead of going to school to learn and hang out with kids her own age, she used the computer to learn German. Days were spent watching some of the many videos they'd acquired and playing with a cat, reading, cleaning, sewing. Sometimes she would peek out from the space in the curtains and check out the million-dollar views from their home, but it was only a sneaky peek. And eventually Scott's work transferred him and they moved in the middle of the night with Natasha hiding. They'd lived in the house for 4 years previously, and now they moved, surrounded by fences, making sure the curtains were drawn and the volume down. When they first moved in, a neighbour complained about loud music to Scott, and he was furious that she'd come onto his property. He'd been drinking that day and told her to never trespass on his land again. He had a secret to hide. After that, there was no loud music to complain about, and the neighbours never noticed any evidence of anyone but Scott living in the home. After a couple of years, the couple moved back to Rockhampton, to a house just 5 minutes away from the family home that Natasha had left, just 4 kilometres away from her mother's house. Natasha said so many times I telephoned my mum that when I heard her voice I put down the phone. I couldn't find the courage to speak. Scott didn't have many visitors to his home. Occasionally there was a relative, and once a month or so his parents would come over for a few hours. If there was visitors to the home, Natasha would hide in the wardrobe of their room, or sometimes the roof cavity. I could never do that. I'd be busting for a pee. When Natasha heard that she was a victim of serial killer Leonard Fraser, she thought it was a sick joke. She even thought it may be a twisted attempt to get her to return home. On the 2nd of April 2003, as the trial of Leonard Fraser was commencing, Natasha called the kids' helpline. She told them that her name was Sally and she wanted some help. She didn't know what to do. She explained that she left home, but someone had been charged with her murder. She told the counsellor she would hide in the cupboard when someone knocked on the door. The counsellor contacted the police and reported the contents of the call, but it was too late. The caller couldn't be traced. A week later, though, a note was received by the Rockhampton police station. It read, "Natasha Ryan is alive and well. You can contact her on," and a phone number was given. And when the police traced this phone number, it was the North Rockhampton house leased to Scott Black. The Sydney Morning Herald later reported that the note was sent by Rockhampton massage therapist Leonard Bauer, and he had found out from someone else that knew that Natasha Ryan was alive and living with her boyfriend, and he sent the note because he knew the trial was on and he wanted to do something about it. Even though Leonard Fraser was a piece of work, he shouldn't be charged with the murder of someone that's alive. On the 9th of April 2003, police raided the Rockhampton house rented to Scott Black. Police found her in the wardrobe, sitting and shaking. She made it very clear that she did not want to be found, and she did not want to come with the police when they found her. But she had no choice in that. The police took her in for interview, and that lasted 7 hours at the police station. And after they'd established who she was, and after confirmation from Robert that this was indeed his daughter, she was taken to her parents for an emotional reunion. Her father Robert recalled that she called out "Daddy" and it was like seeing a ghost. She's very beautiful, very pale, very confused and frightened. But she's alive, and that means more to me than anything. Because Natasha had spent so long inside, she actually couldn't be in the sun for more than a few minutes, and she needed to readjust to the sunlight. Of course, not only Natasha's family and loved ones were elated that she was alive, but so was the town of Rockhampton and Australia. I mean, who hears of this? With a population about 68,000, Rockhampton's just a large country town, and it's got the same sort of values. Rockhampton was descended upon by media from all over the world as news of Natasha's reappearance made international headlines. The reunion with the family was made worse by the fact that it had such extensive media coverage and because of the Leonard Fraser trial. Every movement was recorded, and most of it was by agreement from Natasha, who told her story. I cannot imagine how difficult it was for the family to play out this emotional roller coaster that they must have been on right under the public eye. Her mother was so upset initially that she didn't want to see Natasha. And Natasha, of course, apologised profusely. But this was a woman who'd spent every day wondering where her daughter was. And in the interviews from back then, you can see just how broken she was. On the 30th of April 2003, Natasha actually gave evidence at her own murder trial. There she denied ever knowing Leonard Fraser and confirmed her identity, and she contradicted many of the rumours that said that they had seen her with Leonard Fraser. She denied knowing him at all. Natasha's mother recalls that this was extremely difficult for her, and she felt that the media was making her out to be a liar and that she knew Leonard Fraser, and it put a lot of strain on her with the media coverage and just made her withdraw even further back into her shell, according to her mother. The media coverage, though, did stir up a lot of hard feelings in the town of Rockhampton, and it was reported that Natasha had been paid $200,000 for the interviews. This was actually incorrect. It was $120,000. But the people of Rockhampton felt especially that this money should be returned to the government coffers, particularly to the police service and the state emergency services, who had spent money, time and resources searching for someone that wasn't missing at all. They could have used that money, time and resources into searching for other disappearances or spending time with their own families. Rockhampton's Morning Bulletin newspaper said that while letters from readers initially were surprised and relieved at Natasha's reappearance, the tide turned and then they were angry and annoyed. And it was a feeling that Natasha's mother, Jenny, felt as well. Like, how could her daughter do this to her? And that's the mystery of Natasha Ryan, because over the years everyone has wanted to know why she did it. And she's never really put forward a matter-of-fact explanation. I think there's a simple reason for that. She was 14 when she made a life-changing decision with the support of an adult. And at 14, I made a lot of stupid decisions too. And she was a child. She was ill-equipped to see the long-term effect of her actions. And once you get in, it's really hard to dig your way out. Her codependence on Scott just reinforced, in my opinion, that child state. So although she grew in a lot of ways, she missed a lot of steps of becoming an adult and where you learn to deal with the world. Over the years, Natasha has said different things about why she left. Like she was fearful of a prisoner being released, or she didn't want to talk publicly about it, or it's a reason that she's going to keep close to her and not share. None of which give anyone a feeling of closure, but I guess it's not up to us to have that feeling. It's up to her and her family and the people that support her. So I think she dug herself a hole and she just couldn't get out, or didn't know how to get out until it was forced upon her. She said in an interview once, "I'm not sure it would make any difference saying why I left. I feel whatever I say wouldn't be good enough for the pain I've caused my family." So she has repetitively denied that she was held prisoner by her boyfriend Scott, and always insisted that it was her own idea to leave and that Scott protected her and did a really lovely thing for her, and she was the one that coerced him to do that. Over the years, the family have mended bridges and rebuilt their relationship, and I think in particular for Natasha, the support of her family has made a big difference in the way her life has finally panned out. But of course, Scott and Natasha had to face the music of the legal system, and she felt that she deserved to be severely punished but go to jail, but obviously didn't want to. Her mother obviously didn't want her gone for any longer because she'd already lost nearly 5 years of life with her, and it was a stupid thing that a child had done. And fortunately for Scott and Natasha, they were both fined. Personally, I think the fines were inadequate, but I'm hard. In 2005, Rockhampton District Court Judge Grant Britton sentenced Scott Black to a 3-year jail sentence for perjury with 2 years suspended, so he only did a year in prison after he pleaded guilty to telling police that he didn't know where Natasha was. And then in 2006, Natasha was found guilty of causing a false police investigation. She was fined only $1,000. The police prosecutors wanted a lot more, and there was a lot of talk about her repaying the cost of the police investigation, which was estimated to be about $159,000. Natasha's lawyers said that she didn't have the means to pay for that, and the magistrate agreed despite the contract for $120,000 with the media companies that she had received the money for. But in the end, she only got the $1,000 fine. Now, that $159,000, that was for the police investigation. So the emergency services estimated that they spent between $400,000 and $500,000 on those searches. But by the same token, they weren't just looking for Natasha. They were looking for a number of women that had disappeared. So you can't really say it's all down to Natasha for that one. Scott was further fined another $3,000 and ordered to pay $16,000 towards those police investigation costs. So, $5,000 in fines, $16,000 towards the investigation costs. Not too bad. Well, you got $21,000, they got $120 from the media deal, so still plenty of cash left over to treat yourself to a coffee. So fortunately, over the years, the relationship has gone well between Natasha and reconnecting with her brothers and sister and her parents after such a long separation during that crucial teenage years of her life. Leonard Fraser, of course, didn't do too well. He was found guilty of the 3 murders. He, of course, appealed, and the basis of his appeal was basically that informant Quinn, he wasn't given a fair trial because the little chit-chats that he had in prison were turned over to the police, and that was dismissed by the court. There was plenty of evidence to show that he knew that it was being passed on to the police. Leonard Fraser, of course, went to prison, and he died on 1st of January 2007 of a heart attack. And Queensland Premier at the time was Peter Beattie, and he said his crimes were horrific, and while no one likes to see someone pass away, I don't think there will be a lot of grieving over his passing. I don't think anyone will be shedding any tears, and I think that one's true. And so, where is Natasha now? So, Tash Black, as she likes to be called now, married Scott in 2008, and they've got 4 kids together, and they seem very happy together. The wedding, of course, was covered in the media, and reportedly Women's Day magazine paid $200,000 for exclusive rights to those wedding pics. And even though she lost so much of her education by being in this home and making this little world with her boyfriend, she still seems to have recovered and done extremely well. She attended Central Queensland University, where she studied to be a nurse, and is working as a nurse in North Queensland right now. And people that have worked with her and have been under her care say that she is a beautiful, caring, and very well trained nurse. For me, there's still, some unanswered questions. I'd like to know why Leonard Fraser confessed to Natasha's disappearance. Was it to get more bragging rights in prison? Or was it actually another woman? Because his description was incredibly detailed. And I'd also like to know where Natasha hid during that first search. Like, how come the police didn't find her? And why did Leonard Fraser say that conversation with his inmate, that it was that he picked her up from the cinema and drove her to Yeppoon, when people had seen her at the cinema and she did drive to Yeppoon with Scott? Or is this just a case of rumours that have become embedded in fiction? And why did he say to the inmate that she was alive and living in Rockhampton, which is exactly what happened? Like, did he know something that others didn't? And who was this person that actually knew that she was alive and told the massage therapist that ultimately wrote to the police with the tip? Who was that? And why didn't they say anything earlier? Still so many unanswered questions for me. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this different type of story today, and I hope it wasn't too gruesome for you. Until next time, stay safe.